Hello and welcome back. This is Ethan7878, and in today's programming video we're going to be recreating Minesweeper. Now, you might already know what Minesweeper is, but in case you don't, it's basically a logic puzzle where you have a grid full of squares and some of the squares have mines on them. And each square will tell you how many mines are adjacent to it, and based on that you have to figure out which squares are mines and which squares aren't. Now it's fairly simple, it's just a little bit of recursion and a bit of logic. So without any further ado, let's get right into the implementation of it. So back here in Eclipse now, and you'll see that I have a few imports up top, and the main class is extending applet, and it implements the mouse listener interface. And because it implements that, you'll see I have a bunch of methods down below, 5 to be exact, and those are all the events that could happen with regards to the mouse. I also have my square class, which I haven't touched yet, I just created it, and that is basically going to be what makes up our grid. So some of the squares are going to have mines, and then some of them are just going to be blank, and then some of them are going to be neighboring mines, and we'll have to account for that. Because again, the neighbors are what account for, that's what gives you the clues for the mines. So anyway, you'll see that I've started working on the init method here. So I set the width and the height of the grid, the scale, or basically the size of each square, the number of mines, so 10 is pretty standard for a 100 tile grid, and the number of mines discovered, or the number of tiles discovered rather, which is 0, but we'll need that later on for the wind detection. And so next I set the width and the height of the grid, and I set the size of our applet, and I also set the background color to black, and I just lay out a few basic methods of create grid and place mines, and then finally add mouse listener with this, and that's also needed in order to have the mouse input recognized. Now for create grid, you'll notice that I'm actually making the grid 2 large by 2 in each direction. And that's so we have a border, and it just makes things easier to handle. You don't have to put in special cases for everything because the border won't have any mines on it and you won't show it, but it'll still be part of the game. It just makes things a little easier to handle. Now starting the create grid method there. And in order to do that, I'm going to need a square object, so I get started on that. So we have the x and y coordinates, whether or not it's a mine, and the count. And the count is going to be how many mines are adjacent to it. Then we have booleans of flag and shown, and I'm initializing all those to 0 or false, and the x and y are just getting passed in. And mine will be a 1 if there is a mine, and 0 if there is no mine. So as you can see, fairly simple nested for loop. So for each x and then for each y, the grid at those coordinates is a new square with those x and y. Now for place mines, I did import util, which has the random object. So just create that, and then since I have my mine count, I say for running as many times as the mine count, pick a random x and pick a random y. And next we have to check if that spot on the grid already has a mine. So if it is equal to 0, then we set it to 1. Otherwise, if it's already equal to 1, we decrement I by 1, and the loop will just run 1 extra cycle. Now, there is a little bit of a bug that I put in here by accident, and that is the mines are going to be placed from 0 to this dot width, so there are going to be some mines on the border on the left and on the top that are actually going to be off the screen, but I do get around to fixing that. And then another nested for loop, we have to count the mines for each square on the grid. So we pass in the grid and we call it on the square object. And the first check we do is if the square has a mine, then we just make the count -1. Just by default, it's easier to recognize. And then otherwise, this dot count equals, and then we add up all 8 neighbors and we say, or we see whether or not they have a mine. And this is why it was a little easier to make mine just equal to 0 or 1, because you could just sum everything up. And now, of course, just copy pasting, just to make things a little bit easier, go along a bit faster. So we have 8 neighbors, and now I just have to go through and set the coordinates. So we have the 4 corners, and then stuff that is... Oh, and I have a little bit of a bug here, actually. I forgot to... Well, anyway, I'll explain that later. So I have my 8 neighbors set there, and that's our place mines function done. So it's going to place 10 random mines, and then it's going to count based on where the mines are. Going to set all their neighbors to recognize that they have a mine. Now working on the paint method, which is the one that runs for the applet. So I set the font just as a courier font, so it's monospaced and easy to work with. Everything is the same width. And then I remember, oh wait, I should add in Boolean dead if the player clicks on a mine and they die. So if they're dead, then show all. It just reveals the grid, reveals the answer after the game is over, and then draw the grid. So I made this little show all method, and all that's going to do is, again, that nested for loop. And it's going to take each square and set shown equals to true. And then you'll see how that affects things when I start draw grid, which is going on right now actually. So again, for draw grid, you set the color this time to black and just fill in the background, just reset everything. And I'm using this dot width and this dot height, but actually that's a bug. I should be using this dot get height, or get width and get height, but it works. Just remember this dot width is the width of the grid, which is 10. So a little bit of a bug there I just noticed. But anyway, so the first check we do is if the square is not shown, if it's still hidden, then we set the color to gray. If the color, otherwise the grid, the square is shown, and if there's a mine, then we're going to set the color to red. And last but not least, otherwise we set the color to blue. And then all we have to do is just fill in a rectangle, and this is a little bit of a math here just to draw the grid. Well, just drawing the squares slightly smaller so that there's a little bit of a barrier in between them and it makes it easier to see. Now how big you want to make this is completely up to you. It's something you can definitely personalize, but I just made it so it's 90% as wide as the square that it's in. So we have to offset the x and the y and cast all of those to integers so that the function will accept them, and then that's pretty much it. Now this last part, we're setting a string s, and basically what we're going to do is that's going to be the count for how many mines are beside each square. So if that square is shown, then we need to do something about s. Otherwise, of course, we don't want to show it because it hasn't been discovered. And here I just have an inline if statement. So if the count of that square is equal to 0, we don't have to do anything. We just leave it as blank. Otherwise, we set s to the count. And then, remember, if the count is -1, then that means it's a mine, and I just drew a little star. Otherwise, if the square is not shown and the flag is up, then we set it to capital F, A because F looks like a flag and F stands for flag. And then we just set the color to white and we draw the string at specific coordinates. And these numbers that I put up, 0.33 and I think 0.7 for y, those aren't calculated or anything. I just messed around in a testing version of this until it looked about centered. And definitely you could use font metrics and get this more precise, but this worked for now. I try running it and I get an error, index out of bounds exception, and it's in the square object, so count mines. And I'm just looking around here at what I could do And first of all, I fixed the place mines so that it only spawns mines onto the visible part of the grid. But now we have a problem with, we're going to have a problem with the, with how we discover squares. So having done pretty much everything else, now it's time to move on to what happens when we actually click on the screen. We click somewhere. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say that the x-coordinate is the event.getX divided by this .scale, and that'll give us the x-coordinate of on the grid that we need. And the button is e.getButton. That's just another method. So button 1, I believe, is left click, and then button 3 is right click, etc. So if we left click somewhere on the grid, then we want to discover square there. And if it's any other button, then we want to place a flag there, or we want to toggle the flag there. And finally, we repaint and consume E, and that what consume does is it basically destroys it so it doesn't get confused with anything else. And now here we get to the part where we're going to need a bit of recursion. So discover square at x and y. Now you might already know from Minesweeper, but if you click on a square that has no adjacent mines, then you know for a fact that you can click on all the squares adjacent to that because there will never be a mine there. And the game is usually nice in that regard, that it does all that for you, so you don't have to do all the nitty-gritty work basically. And that uses recursion because for every square that's bordering that, you want to discover that square, and if that square that you just discovered also has 0, then you want to discover all its neighbors as well. And so that's basically what discover square is going to do. So if that square is already shown, then we return because, well, we won't accomplish anything. And otherwise, mark that square as shown equals true, and then add 1 to this not discovered. And I'll get into that a little bit later near the end of the video. And now finally, if that square that we clicked on has a mine, then we set this .dead equals true. And I don't really do anything with this .dead. Of course, if you want to continue this on your own, then you could do some animation maybe, or some text that pops up. This is just basically the groundwork for all that. And I put in a line there, if this not discovered equals the width times the height minus the mine count, then that would be this .1 equals true. I do add that in later, but for now it's not important. And finally, if the count at that point in the grid is 0, then we want to discover all 8 neighbors. So I'm just putting in all 8 neighbors, all the coordinates, sort of like I did for the count neighbors. So it's the same 8 spots. And then last but not least, if the square is on the border and we try and discover it, then it's going to call squares that are beyond the border, and that'll lead to problems, that'll lead to index out of bounds exceptions, etc. So it's best to just check for that. So if it's less than or equal to 0 on the x and y, or if it's off the left and top edges, or if it's off the right and bottom edges, or if that square is already shown. And here I run into a little bit of a bug, and I'm not exactly sure why. I'm just looking around trying to find out what's going on. And remember earlier I said that there was a little bit of a bug in my square.java, and yeah, here I do add in this .1. So again, you could do the same thing with this .dead as this .1. And you'll notice the numbers aren't really matching up on the screen with where the mines are. So definitely something going on there. And then I also noticed that I am drawing mines off the edge of the screen, so now I have all 10 mines, whereas before I only had 7 or 8. So just quick debugging, and then I realized, oh wait, I'm calling X as a Y coordinate. So I fix all that, and then I run it, and it's running perfectly. So last but not least, flag, which is important just to keep track. It's just for the player to keep track of where the the mines are. And last but not least, if I just keep right-clicking, I can place a flag. If I left-click, I can discover a tile. And the last two, I take a chance, and I'm right. And there you go. So that's Minesweeper done. And you'll notice that if I also click on a spot where I know there is a mine, then it shows all the rest of the grid. So that was Minesweeper. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and try it yourself. Again, there is room for improvement. You could draw a menu on the side with a button to start a new game. You could do all kinds of stuff like that. You could do some animations when you click on a square. It's really up to you what you want to do with it. But anyway, I've been Ethan7878. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, then hit the like button before you leave. If you have any feedback or suggestions, leave those in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this on my channel, you can go click there and subscribe. Anyway, thanks for watching.